Welcome to our first episode of Outlap Critical. We're going to be discussing today the news of the week, the news of the month, the news of the century, of course, which is Lewis Hamilton is leaving Mercedes and will be joining Ferrari come 2025. Of course, we're going to be covering the Andretti story and how F1 is kind of locking them out. But we'll have to save that for maybe episode 2 or 3. We're going to have to divest all of our energy into talking about what's going on with Lewis and moving into Ferrari and all the different things that comes with. So without further ado, let's start with the first thing that comes to mind, which is, Lewis, of course, is a number one driver, but so is Charles. And we're going to be placing them both in the situation. And the first thing that comes to mind is Nico Rosberg, and Lewis Hamilton, and that, epic battle they had all through the year. But obviously it led to some good racing, but also led to a lot of crashes, a lot of drama within the team. What kind of relationship are Charles and Lewis going to have when they're teammates? Are they going to be, a mentor-mentee kind of scenario? Is it going to be a really competitive garage where they're both, going back and forth at each other? Is it going to kind of be like Max and all of his, number two teammates? How's that going to play out? Obviously Lewis has a lot of experience with Fred Vasseur back from the GP3 days, and so they're familiar with each other and one another and know how one another work together. And so, I think that's going to go a long way, smoothing the path and kind of getting Lewis kind of acclimated to that team. But another thing we have to think about also is Lewis has been with Mercedes for the last 12 years. He's used to doing things a very certain way. They're used to doing things their own way at Mercedes and have been very successful with it over the years. But the question being, what is Ferrari's garage like? What is it like, in Italy with the Ferrari team working on a day-to-day basis? How much input does Lewis want to have on the actual, decision making? Well, was that something that was promised to them alongside, what was going on with the car? Speaking of which, that Mercedes was nowhere for the last 2 years. They're basically starting from scratch this year too. So what is it that Lewis knows about, this next year's car that we don't? What is it that Lewis knows about the 2025, 2026, when the new regulations come in? What does he know, if anything? I mean, is it just promises? And, Ferrari has made the decision to tell Lewis, hey, this is what we can do. This is what we're expecting. And Lewis has more faith in that than he does his Mercedes team, the current team that he's with. That's the question to be asked. And on top of the fact that when this decision was made, this doesn't seem like something that just happened overnight. And so how long have they been discussing it? How long has this been a matter of, discussion? And, come in a lot of American sports, we have what's called a tampering rule. So if somebody's not a free agent, they belong to a team, another team manager or another team owner or somebody on the other team, really anybody affiliated with that team, cannot tamper or cannot discuss any of, they can't start negotiating early, basically. It's kind of a way to keep, some of these teams that may have more financial revenue from sniping talent or getting ahead of the trading season or the off season, and so during season, you can't tamper with another team's talent. And so I wonder what the protocol is on that with Formula One and how they, police that. You have the Oscar Piastri situation with Oscar changing teams, or I guess not really changing teams, but not wanting to sign with Alpine, and ended up ultimately signing with McLaren. It turns out that was the right decision, but what protection does the team have against what assurances and what protections does the team have against stars going from team to team and leaving, mid-contract? Obviously, with the Lewis situation, it won't be mid-contract. Kind of went off on a tangent there about that, but while he is in contract with Mercedes, what are the rules when it comes to who can do what? You know, speaking of the Mercedes team, you have Toto Wolff, who is, good friends with Fred Vasseur. What kind of relationship does that lead to? Will Lewis have the same kind of influence in the Ferrari team that he has in the Mercedes team? Is he going to be able to come in and, make certain demands that maybe Charles can't? How does Lewis deal with all of the mistakes that Ferrari seems to always make? What there's a lot to discuss here, with the Lewis Hamilton situation. Obviously, this is dropped in the middle of the winter break, and so there's not really a lot of Formula One to discuss, as a lot of contracts have been going through. But we had already we were kind of done with Lewis. He'd already signed his contract, so had George. We kind of knew that Lewis was kind of taken care of, and it kind of felt like Lewis was going into this season and the next season, honestly, with the Mercedes, kind of weighing the options and seeing where he wanted to go. And that kind of felt like what was going to be happening with Lewis over the next 2 years with the contract that he had. But it seems as though the contract that he has now is a contract that allows him to make a decision to step out early if he wants to. And it looks like he's exercising that option, obviously, in order to be a part of the Ferrari team. And so, I don't know how I feel about it. Seeing Lewis in the Mercedes team has always been something that just seems synonymous. After McLaren, just Lewis in the Mercedes team and building that team up to where it is today just seems like really just Lewis and Mercedes were synonymous. And seeing him in the Ferrari red is going to be interesting because, we get a real opportunity to see what that Ferrari really can do. Charles is a great driver, especially on the, over one lap with the extremely fast qualifying times. But we've seen time and time again what happens during races. It's hard for him to keep up the, not keep up the pace, so to speak, but just stay clean, mistake-free throughout the race. Maybe Lewis is being brought in to kind of mentor him to get him prepared to be the next big thing in Formula One after Lewis has stepped aside. Obviously, Max is still here, whereas Red Bull's still, on top of the mountain. But maybe this is what they're looking for at Ferrari as opposed to Carlos Sainz. Speaking of Carlos, where is Carlos going to end up? There's so much. I mean, you saw his message on Instagram and on X or Twitter, where he's thanking everyone, obviously, and I feel like this wasn't a decision that he was, I don't feel like this was almost like a mutual splitting. I feel like, at least up until the new regulations begin, or at least maybe a couple years after, this is what Carlos really was at. Well, really Carlos was looking to get accomplished here was to be able to get security up until and maybe a few years into the new regulations. And, that's really important for a lot of the drivers is to have that security going into these new regulations. You're going to want to be able to fill out that new car. You're going to want to be able to, you don't know what team is going to get it right. Your team might be the team that get it right. Your constructor might be the one that figures this thing out, much like Red Bull has figured out, this variation of the cars. So with Carlos Sainz, the question really is, where is he going to end up? Because he's on the top. He's in a top, 3 or 4 team. You've got Red Bull at the top. You've got Mercedes, Ferrari, and, maybe McLaren. I mean, as of right now, you've also got Aston Martin kind of creeping in. But, I mean, for most of the year, Aston Martin was just, the beginning of the year started off hot and, kind of fell off towards the middle of the year and kind of got a little bit back towards the end. So I kind of put them at the top of the mid-tier. But, where is there for him to go? Because, those teams are all filled out with talent already. He's not going to Red Bull. I highly doubt they would put him with George at Mercedes. McLaren has their pair already signed, which, I'm sure before we all got the news, I'm sure the paddock had a lot of rumors. The ones that they know how to they know how to differentiate between the rumors that are real and the rumors that are not. And so, you know, Red Bull sniffing around looking for more talent. I just don't see that as a place for Carlos. You know, now Audi is going to be coming into the grid, I believe 2026. And so the question would be, would that be the natural, or 2025 rather, would that be the natural place for Carlos, as his dad has the connections with Audi, with the endurance racing? Maybe that's a natural spot for him, but again, that's not a top team. That's a mid-tier team. We've seen what people can do in that car, and it's just, I don't know if that's going to change over the next couple of years. And is that where Carlos really deserves to be? With the grid getting this tight, another reason that you could dive into that Andretti story, with the grid this tight and so many drivers in queue, that's going to end up leading to a lot of drivers getting pushed out of the door. And I feel like with Carlos, if he doesn't get this Audi seat, where else is there for him to go? He's going to end up almost in a Danny Ricciardo-like situation where who knows if what Danny really could do if he was in a competitive car. But instead he was in the McLaren. That didn't go well, and then he went on to the AlphaTauri now, and it's not a competitive car. And so is that what we're going to be ending up with Carlos as well? Is he going to end up, competing in non-competitive cars? I mean, we don't think that Checo Perez is going to be with Red Bull much longer. If not the middle of this year, maybe the end of this year, they'll have a new lineup for Red Bull, and I just don't see them bringing in Carlos. Not because Carlos is not worthy of the seat. It's just that I don't think Carlos is in a position where he wants to settle for a second position. I think he wants to be a number one driver, which is why some of those reasons he wanted to get those contracts signed at Ferrari, but Ferrari was giving that to Charles, of course. And so with him needing to be a number one driver, I just don't feel like he will be comfortable in that seat next to Max, which has pretty much destroyed every driver that, has been in that seat. And so, again, where does he go? So, back to Lewis and Charles. The interesting thing about it is, we really haven't seen that fire out of Charles yet. So what's going to happen when he's, seriously challenged every single week? I feel like he felt comfortably that he was a number one driver due to the way that he was treated in the, in the garage. I feel like he was in the position to be the number one driver. He felt like he was the number one driver. Ferrari all but said he was the number one driver. And I feel like that's exactly, the position he likes to be in with the team. So how is he going to be, when the team needs to give Lewis the preferential treatment? Because it wouldn't make sense for Lewis to come into a team and be the number two driver. And so he would have to be somebody who, they would have to have some kind of things in place where he's absolutely the number one driver or absolutely gets the preference. I mean, we've seen what happened in Mercedes when he didn't get the correct seating position, for instance. Lewis for sure thinks that he wants the seat farther back, and that was something that they had to work through. And a lot of teams do kind of a one-size-fits-all, so to speak, with their cars, not necessarily changing all the things for one person and not the other is what happens with a lot of these teams, especially when you start talking about cost cap. And so how is that going to work with the two of those drivers? What exactly are they going to be doing, when there's a double stack situation? Lewis is going to have preference for the most part. Is Lewis going to be, is Charles going to be asked to move aside, when Lewis is storming through the field? Or, how are they going to react to that? But again, Charles has never really been the driver or the person that seems to be fiery. He's not Max. He's not, going to create too much of a stir. At least he hasn't so far. And so, will he be passive in this situation now that he's definitely going to be the number two driver? I mean, you can say what you want. The team has been his this entire time, but I mean, it's just not anymore. It's just not. You've got a driver coming in that has way too much stature, way too much, history. You don't bring a driver into your lineup like that if you don't expect him to be a driver that kind of puts you over the top. And so it seems as though Ferrari is going towards, seems like Ferrari is going more towards a championship push. It's a big splash. It's a big news thing. From what I understand, they love Lewis in Italy, and so this is going to be something that's natural for him. But it seems like Ferrari really is going for it here. They're trying to create a scenario where they're the one to the throne, the mighty Red Bull machine right now. And if you look at last year, aside from the McLaren threat, the real threat came from Ferrari. I mean, there were poles from Charles. There were, you had Carlos winning the one race that Red Bull didn't win, all year long. And so, there are flashes that Ferrari is doing things that are, positive. However, we do have that Ferrari bug where there just seems to be things, that little black cat running across the street, running in front of their car at all times. It just, it just seems as though Ferrari always has something going on. Not having the tires ready for Charles, in the pits, the hydraulics going out in his car randomly. How is Lewis going to deal with those kind of situations? Is he prepared for that? Say what you want about Mercedes, but they typically had it together. There typically wasn't a lot of, man, it doesn't seem like they have it together stuff going on with Mercedes. But with, Ferrari, that seems to be a weekly occurrence. And so, I guess we'll see. Again, with Lewis's relationship with Fred, the team principal, already set in stone, that kind of smooths a couple of things out that you'll, typically worry about when it comes to, a star player moving into a different team, after a historical run. And so, with Lewis moving over to Ferrari, I mean, first, we got to talk about Lewis and Red. That's going to be something that's different, and then on top of the fact, did you see that whenever the news dropped of Lewis joining Ferrari in 2025, go back and look at the stock. Look at the stock price from yesterday, and then look at the stock price after the announcement. And look at the sharp uptake in Ferrari stock just from announcing Lewis Hamilton was joining the team. So that's another reason why we're saying, hey, this is not going to be, hey, Lewis, you're coming in to be the second fiddle to Charles Leclerc. This is, Lewis, you're coming in to either be the mentor to Charles while you're leading the team to the next, to their first, championship since 2007, And so, Lewis has been brought in to bring some of that championship mentality. And so the question now is, what happens with Mercedes? Is George going to be expected to be the number one driver? There are rumors of, Fernando Alonso, when he's done at his, contract over at Aston Martin. Would he be a good fit over at the Mercedes to kind of twilight his career? Mentor George a little bit. Still fight for wins. Maybe, can we imagine Alonso in that powerful vehicle? That'd be something to behold, right? And so we've got Fernando, as an option. Alex Albon would be an amazing option. He's still young, and has shown a lot in that Williams car. That's a natural connection, of course, with the Mercedes connection with Williams there. George came through Williams as well. And so, that's a pairing that might work. And then you've got the, Mercedes drivers that are coming through the the lower circuits. How would they fare in the Mercedes? You know, is that the plan? But I guess all this would make sense, or all this would come down to whether Mercedes has been kind of caught out on this whole situation, or if this was something they knew about and knew was happening. I mean, there were rumors that Lewis wanted a 4-year contract, but only ended up with the 2. Would that be something that we need to consider? Had Lewis been kind of pushed out, obviously you wouldn't think so with the status that Lewis has, and listening or seeing Toto's response to it. Very, very businesslike, very, very professional, very complimentary to Lewis still, so it doesn't seem as though there's any issue there. But if you remember when Lewis left McLaren, just the love and admiration he got from his team, the people are standing and clapping and giving him motivation on his way out the door. As you leave and you go to a rival team, and it's just like, this guy has such a magnetic effect on people. What is he going to do in that Ferrari garage? Mons is going to be crazy. I just, you wonder about the first podium. You wonder about the fans. Are most fans Mercedes fans, or are they Lewis Hamilton fans? Will they be moving over with Lewis? Will the fan bases coexist well? A lot of questions to be asked just about, how things are going to, pan out with this situation, with this scenario.